Chapter 2.10, Alternative Media and Processes. This is the last chapter before midterm 2. Please refer to the announcement on Canvas regarding midterm 2. There's an announcement about the date, the time it will be open, and the types of questions that will be on the midterm. Here are the terms that you need to know and their associated study guide images. Artworks made using alternative media and processes break down the traditional boundaries between art and life. They draw our attention to actions or ideas rather than to a physical product. Excuse me. The creative process produces events, ideas, and experiences that are artworks in and of themselves. In conceptual art, the idea behind the artwork is more important than any visible subject or material product. Conceptual art often produces no permanent artwork and very little that can be promoted or sold. Performance art has some similarities to theater because it is performed in front of a live audience. Unlike traditional theater, however, there is rarely an identifiable story. When artists design an entire exhibition space as an artwork, usually in a gallery or museum, it is called an installation. Often installations are designed to fit the dimensions or environment of a particular location. These installations are called site-specific. So, context of alternative media during the 20th century, a way of making art emerged that focused on modes of creation such as actions, texts, and environments. These approaches differed from the traditional Western practice of quote-unquote fine art, narrowly defined as painting on canvas and sculptures on pedestals. Because this chapter focuses on the ideas expressed in the making of artworks rather than finished projects themselves, we should also look at the documentation about them. Instructions relating to a piece or photographs or videos made during a performance. The work themselves tend to last for a relatively short period of time. So Jackson Pollock's painting, okay? And Pollock was kind of a groundbreaker in that he broke a lot of the rules that had been previously happening before. And one of the things he did is he sort of let control the brush. So that's the canvas. He's got one foot on the floor there. He's leaning out over it, and he's literally using a paintbrush to sort of slash and dribble and dab the paint onto the canvas. So he's making the change from very careful, either wrist or forearm, controlled brush movements to what we could refer to as body art or action art. And so there's another example. In that case, he's actually using a stick to apply the paint. So these are, we're talking about 50s and 60s here, 1950s and 60s, but this is sort of laying the groundwork for some of the things that will come later. That idea of breaking what had been previously done, okay? So here we talk about Tsai Guo-chan, all right? He is in some ways a performance artist. His have sort of a performance. They also have a temporal component to them, or a time component. So one of the things that he works with, not all his works are with this, one of the things that he works with is fireworks or gunpowder. So here what he's done is down below, he's got these very large sheets of paper, and he sprinkles gunpowder on them. And in some cases he applies it very carefully, in some cases more randomly. And then what happens is he ignites the gunpowder, it goes off, and it burns the paper. And that then is the performance piece. That is the result of the performance piece. So he's kind of that the idea is the most important thing. The execution, the product, is sort of secondary. And like Pollock, there's an element of chance to what he does. I mean, he can control where he puts the gunpowder to a degree, but there's also elements of chance. I mean, how it burns, how long it burns, does it stop burning? All those things, he's worked out a lot of bugs over trial and error, but there's certain unknowables that happen. But he does end up with a physical product. Conceptual art. Conceptual art is a form of art that emphasizes ideas and radically downplays the importance of the work of art as craft object. It has flourished from the 1960s onward. So Marcel Duchamp, Fountain. The Dadaist point of view in making the work was that the meaning of the artwork transcends its medium. An artist can communicate worthwhile ideas using any sort of material because the message is what matters. His approach opened up possibilities of making art from everyday things and materials, imagery from popular cultures, or even simply ideas. So, anyone who's been in a quote-unquote men's restroom might recognize this. This is a urinal. He's laid it on its back instead of hanging on a wall. He also signed it R. Mutt. And R. Mutt, or Richard Mutt, was sort of a persona, I guess you would say, of his. And Duchamp was the one that came up with the idea, such as this, as ready-mades, meaning you can take an existing object, sort of imbue it with your artistic idea, sign it, and it becomes your work of art. So again, the concept, the idea is the most important thing. The other thing about Dada is they're trying to bring things together that don't really make sense. A urinal installed in an art museum. They're trying to show you things in different contexts, put things together that you would never think would go together. And the idea is you get sort of a shock or an awakening, and you develop new meaning or understanding as a result. So there is Duchamp, and that is Fountain, displayed in a museum. But again, for him, what was most important was the concept, the idea of the ready-made, signing it, presenting it as art. Duchamp was one of the first artists to experiment with kinetic art, or art with moving pieces, although his works of this kind are less well known than his ready-mades. Similarly, Swiss artist Jing Tengde was interested in exploring impermanence, accident, and uncertainty as legitimate forces within the creation and experience of a work of art. So this thing is called Homage to New York, and you can copy and paste that YouTube clip to see it in, well, working or in process. The work was designed to mimic the automatic processes in art and spontaneous painting techniques that had become popular among artists. So kind of a Jackson Pollock kind of feel. But these things tended to work to a point, then sort of self-implode. Barbara Kruger. Kruger uses her training and experience as a graphic designer to combine found images and words to give them new meanings. Is there a feminist overtone to her work? And then why does she speak in the first person? So she's taken what looks like maybe a mannequin or a piece of sculpture, and then put on it, "Your gaze hits the side of my face." So, is there a feminist overtone? Well, Kruger's kind of talking about the idea of the male gaze and the idea that women have been objectified. They've been looked upon, judged, by society. And so she says, "Your gaze hits the side of my face." So it's like, even though, whoever this entity represents is doing its own thing, she still may be looked at or judged or whatever. And then why does she speak in the first person? That really personalizes it. Because what would you say? A gaze hits the side of my face? It's like, Well, whose gaze? No, it's your gaze. So it brings you in and incorporates you with the work in a way that not using that pronoun wouldn't. And this was a installation at the Hirshhorn Museum, and it says belief plus doubt equals sanity. And so typically her work is like this, is she'll put these kind of taglines up. And what they really do, and a lot of them some of them speak about feminine identity. So a lot of them, like this one, speak about consumer society. So for example, you want it, you buy it, you forget it. Okay. So does belief and doubt equal sanity? Okay. So there's sort of these sound bites, if you will. I mean, it's not a sound installation. But, here, for example, it says, plenty should be enough. Buy it, how much, love it. So it's these little things. And again, she comes from that graphic design background. So she's kind of pushing you to think about consumerism and how we're sort of conditioned to want the latest iPhone or the latest computer or whatever. And then sometimes we get it and then it's like, well, it was fun. Now what? So she's talking a lot about that. As the text is written in the first person, it addresses viewers directly and engages them to think about their place in the world, consumerism, and feminist interventions. In an interview in 1912, Kruger said about this piece, "I try to make work about how we are to one another, in this broader sense of what our social relations are." And you'll see she works in this very black and white, that's like almost like a shout or a command font, she's not writing it in cursive and it's not on pink or blue. It's black and white, red and white. And these are things that really draw our eye, that speak to authority and truth, maybe. That's one of my favorite. So it says, "I shop, therefore I am." What is the size and shape of that red rectangle? It's a credit card, and have anyone, I'm guilty, participated in retail therapy where you're just like, I just want to go get something new. It'll make me feel better. And then, yeah, maybe it does for 20 minutes or whatever. But anyway, so she's making you think about that. Your body is a battleground. And you notice, so what she has here is she has a black and white photo, and this is the negative or the reverse. So you see the eyebrow is dark here, it's white there, the lips are red here, they're white there, etc. Okay? So what she's talking about is it's black or white, yes or no, right or wrong. And I think what she's also referring to is the idea, and I'm sure I've told you this quote before, Abigail Salam Godot said, "Cosmetic companies take away women's self-image, and sell it back to us in the form of beauty products." And so in that sense, our bodies are battleground between different manufacturers and different, soap, shampoo, makeup, body scrub, whatever, It's also, our bodies are also a battleground, and I'm speaking from a female perspective, this is my voice. Our bodies are battleground over birth control or other feminine rights. So I think that's what she's referencing. And this was the cover of W Magazine, and you can see it's the art issue starring Kim Kardashian. And so the cover is, "It's all about me. I mean you. I mean me." And part of that is tongue-in-cheek. It's Kardashian admitting, I want the media about me. I would like to be in the media. I would like to be in the spotlight. So yeah, there's some stuff here in, maybe in the magazine or whatever about you, but it's really about me. So I think it's really rather tongue-in-cheek. Yoko Ono, a Japanese-born American artist and musician, began making conceptual artwork in the early 1960s. Her first pieces were poetic instructions to be reformed or just imagined. Sometimes they were typescripts framed and put on the wall. Other times, Ono painted right on the museum or gallery wall, highlighting the transient nature of some of these pieces. When the exhibition ended, those instructions would disappear. She then started to ask viewers to complete her pieces by, for example, burning or walking on the paintings. Eventually, she made instruction paintings consisted of typed instructions rather than finished works of art. The instructions are open-ended and serve as a beginning point rather than a final product. They rely heavily on the interaction and participation of the viewer. So there's a wish tree for Liverpool, and this is one of these things, and this is, to my understanding, a Japanese tradition where you write a wish on a piece of paper. It may be for good fortune or for someone else, something beneficial to someone else, and then you put it on a tree. The instructions for wish tree state, make a wish, write it down on a piece of paper, fold it, and tie it around the branch of a wish tree. Ask your friends to do the same. Keep wishing until the branches are covered with your wishes. This is really fun. Operation Pay Dirt / Funded Dollar Bill Project. These unique artworks will be delivered to the steps of Congress, where an even exchange of this creative capital will be requested to obtain funding for implementation of Operation Pay Dirt. Performance art. During the 1960s and 1970s, artists all over the world began exploring theatrical actions or performances as a new form of creative activity they termed performance art. American composer John Cage incorporated into his music chance operations, experimental techniques, and even silence. Heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism, Cage wanted to jolt his audiences into paying attention to the life all around them. He was one of the first artists to conduct happenings or impromptu art actions. Theater piece number 1, 1952, was an unrecorded collaboration in poetry, music, dance, and paintings by the faculty and students at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. The performers mingled with the audience, and the piece relied for its outcome on improvisation and chance rather than a script or musical score. So that's Cage during a concert. So Cage's work shifted the emphasis to performance rather than documentation. Happenings expanded the scope of art to include the living moment, actions as they happened here and now. And some happenings did include audience members or people who were at hand. And you can see he's not using the traditional, shall we say, concert tools. Joseph Beuys' Coyote, I Like America and America Likes Me. So what Beuys did, he's German, was he came to America and he basically confined himself to a gallery space for I think it was 3 days with a coyote. And he interacted periodically with the coyote. Sometimes the coyote slept. He was not attacked during the time he spent there, to my understanding. And you kind of have to know about Beuys to kind of get what this might have been about. So Beuys was a pilot in World War II, and he was shot down. And he survived by hiding in an animal carcass. I think it was like a cow carcass. And then he was found by local inhabitants and nursed back to health. And they wrapped him in felt and fed him broth and things. So a lot of his work addresses survival or putting oneself in a very difficult situation. And so here you can see in this case he has himself wrapped in felt. He's sort of hunkered down, the coyote's tugging on it. So, but again, this is a good example of performance art where there is really not a plot. he just went into this with the whatever happens happens kind of attitude, and I don't necessarily mean that from a safety aspect, but so the idea again but his sort of thinking about survival and pitting himself against in a different situation sort of comes into play with this as well. So this is Vito Acconci's following piece, and talk about things you probably wouldn't get away with today. So he would follow people and have the process photographed. So this is Vito here in the suit, and he's following the man. I think it's the man down there in the white shirt with the dark hair. Okay. So, and then someone's behind him photographing him following the person. He said he would wait till the person came out of whatever business, whatever they came out of, whatever, and he would follow them until they went back indoors someplace. So, okay, you don't ever, to my recollection, see the person's face that he's following, but in today's society, I don't know how well that would go over for very justifiable reasons. But anyway, this was his idea of a performance piece. So his stated intentions were for the piece were choosing a person at random in the street, a new location each day, following him wherever he goes, however long or far he travels, and then the activity ends when he enters a private place, his own office, etc. So we performed this activity for 23 days, and the longest following of an individual lasted 9 hours. So it is a very interesting idea, but with today's concerns about sort of personal space and privacy, I think that would raise a whole nother layer to doing something like this now. An exhibition of following police includes documents of the events, such as the artist's handwritten note cards and photographs of Acconci walking behind the person being followed. The work examines both the relationship between the artist and the viewer and the way an artist's actions create interactions with another person. In this sense, Acconci's work is a conceptual performance. It is about ideas and a set of actions as much about the production of a work of art. So Sophie Callie's voyeuristic fascination with the lives of others inspired The Hotel, a project she executed in the early 1980s while posing as a chambermaid at a hotel in Venice, Italy. Each work in the series is a portrait of a room she was assigned to clean, including photographs of the bed and personal belongings she found there, and a text by the artist offering her imaginative impression of the absent guests. And so I put a link there to when it was shown at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, so you can sort of see some of the photographs that she took and these sort of like made up narratives she created about the people who stayed in the room. And that is definitely an example of something that probably many people would find as today, or even then, would find as a violation of personal space. But you decide, is it legitimate art? Is it allowable art? Or has she crossed the line? So, and I didn't highlight this one, I apologize. So this is one of your study guide images. So this is Maria Abramovic, The Artist is Present, and it was a performance for 3 months at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Every day during that period, she sat quietly at a table in the museum's gallery all day, from before it opened until after it closed. Museum visitors were invited to sit one at a time for as long as they wished in the chair opposite her. The title of the piece poignantly calls attention to its purpose, for the artist to be personally in the space and engage with people, creating what she has called an energy dialogue without talking, touching, or otherwise overtly communicating. Through this engagement, Abramovic put her mental and physical abilities to the test. At the same time, the audience experienced the intensity of this seemingly simple interaction. Portraits were made of each person who sat in the chair, showing most of them staring intently forward, some of them smiling, and a number of people crying. So there's a link to a video about the installation. So technically, it's a performance. Socially historically, let's say, and the social historic and the aesthetic, I think, kind of blend on these. Socially historically, it is about the artist literally being present in the gallery. I mean, usually we think of the artist present via their work, okay? In this case, she was literally there. And yes, it was physically challenging for her to do that, to sit still, focused for a long period of time. Another interesting component of it was that she didn't speak, so whoever sat opposite her had whatever reaction they did. And the other interesting thing is it really could have extended beyond the gallery space because a number of people took cell phone photographs or videos of what was happening. So the performance piece, although created within that space, resonated beyond the walls of the museum, which is kind of an interesting idea. So performance piece, again, the performance was the most important thing. It happened to be documented. The museum chose to document each person who sat opposite her, okay? But the performance itself was the most important thing. In this case, yes, there is interaction with the audience. And then socially, historically, aesthetically, it was about the challenge that she went through physically and mentally. It was about, again, her being actually physically present in the gallery. It was about how the people reacted. And it really did spread beyond the gallery walls via cell phone images and videos, etc. Installations and environments. This is one of your study guide images, and this is a detail of it, as you can see, and it's Edward Kienholz's The Beanery. It's an installation because the entire thing, and I'll show you the whole picture in a second, was installed in museums. You can also think of it as a sculptural tableau or one of those stationary scenes arranged for artistic impact. And I just want to point out on this one that the faces are clocks, and I'll explain that in a minute. So there is the whole scene right there, and you can see that it's life-size. So Kienholz meticulously replicated the interior of his local bar, Barney's Beanery, complete with life-size figures inspired by people he knew. To keep the experience as true to the artistic intentions as possible, the original soundtrack on tape has recently been converted to CD. An odor paste that smells like a bar is replenished by the museum. By placing clocks in place of the faces, Kienholz reiterated the fact that time now stands still in the sculptural tableau. So, again, he assembled all these different things to create this. And just to further explain a little bit, odor paste is a real thing. It wasn't just for this particular installation. You see it used a lot in historical museums, like if they want to make a blacksmith shop sort of smell like a blacksmith shop or something like that. So you can have custom created odor pastes, and then obviously there are companies that make them and you purchase them. So, and he uses these really effectively. I saw him at the LA County Museum. He recreated a garage space, like an old 1940s, 50s garage. And it literally smelled like that sort of old motor oil type smell. So anyway, for the study guide image, I want you to know that it's an installation. It's also a sculptural tableau in that stationary scene arranged for artistic impact sense. So stationary scene arranged for artistic impact. And then just socially historically, he's replicating the interior of his local bar, complete with life-size figures inspired by people he knew. And then clocks replace faces. And that reiterates the fact that time now stands still in this sculptural tableau. And there isn't really anything aesthetically so much with this. You could just say that he's, tried to be as true to his intention as possible, down to the original soundtrack and odor paste. Okay. This is, excuse me, just another work by his called The Weight. And this is, again, one of his sculptural tableaus. And all the elements you see in there, the lamps, the rug, the sewing basket, etc., those are all life-size. The figure, again, is one of his little sort of assemblages. So he's got a photo for a face. Interestingly enough, he used cow's legs for her lower legs there. And, the weight, it seems to sort of imply she's extremely old, perhaps waiting for her time to pass and join the figures that are that are represented in the photographs who, I don't know, maybe have passed before her. And you can see that this figure, although this was done in 64, 65, really reflects a much older environment, as if the home has not changed in many, many, many years. This is another of his works called Five Car Stud, and this one is life-size. It's quite large. I saw this at the National Gallery of American Art, and what's happening is there are white people attacking a person of color, and he's making a very poignant statement. And there have been other works of his that have addressed this, and just this idea of the inequity of treatment of persons of color, down to horrific scenes like this. And so he's really, it was done in a period, not that other periods are not as well, but in sort of the LA area, when there was a very charged atmosphere about the way persons of color were being treated. This is another one of his called The State Hospital. Another installation. This box was put into, as you can see, a museum gallery. And the only way you could look inside the box was through this little aperture here, this little window in the door. And that was what was inside the box. So you have these sort of waxy, I mean, they're actually fiberglass, but they look very waxy figures. They're nude males, they're anatomically correct. They're on these dirty, gross mattresses without bedding. The only sort of accommodation for human need is the bedpan on the floor. And their faces are opaque bubbles. And this element right in through here is like a thought bubble. So the idea is perhaps this figure here is in some sort of murky way thinking about his situation. That's one interpretation of it. And the figures are bound to the bed there. And Kienholz evidently did work for a period of time in a state hospital. And so he has said that this particular work is based on not necessarily one-to-one correlation, but definitely based on things he observed when he was in that particular work environment. So he's making a pretty pointed comment here about the idea of the way some people are treated in these situations. And I always sort of personally wondered, and you obviously can think otherwise, if that sort of murky, opaque head or face represents being so drugged up that you're only semi-conscious. I mean, you are to a degree, but you're not, of what's actually physically happening to you. This is another one of his called Backseat Dodge, and he really did chop a 38 Dodge, so it does literally have the front and the tail. He basically cut out the front seat of it, and so you just see the back seat in there. There are beer bottles here, and it is a couple, shall we say, getting busy. So the female is laying down on the back seat. The male figure is kind of at a chicken wire, which you still know exactly what's happening, but it's a little less naturalistic, shall we say. But the point is being made. And then this is a marvelous installation by Fred Wilson, and it's called Mining the Museum. So I just want to point out with this shot of it, notice that these figures have their back to the way they would normally be viewed, because these are the walls here. So the figures aren't up against the walls or pulled forward from the walls and facing the main viewing area. They have their backs to the main viewing area. So American with African, Native American, and European ancestry, Fred Wilson, draws on his background as an art educator to rearrange objects in museum collections. He takes on the role of curator and converts the role into an art action. Wilson looks critically at the assumptions behind the ways museum exhibitions work. In Mining the Museum at the Maryland Historical Society, Wilson selected and presented objects from the museum's own collection in unusual ways, and included objects rarely seen because they were usually in storage. So again, there's one of the shots of it there. And this is another one that he did there. And so basically what's happening here is these are chairs from the museum's collection. This is also from the museum's collection. And this was a device used to tie slaves to when they were beaten. And so what he's done is, obviously, instead of arranging these chairs sort of facing out into the gallery, he's positioned them in sort of a viewing mode, if you will. And you can sort of think about this time period and who might have owned those chairs back in the day. And so he's taking away their just historical reference and positioning them in a much more charged position. So again, so these are all works selected from the museum's own collection. There were also provocative wall labels and installed audio loops. And the purpose of the exhibition was to expose the museum's unconscious racial biases. So for example, here, you know, who owned those chairs, who was positioned on that device is something he's calling into question. This is another one, and so I don't know if you've been to a museum where they have metal work from a certain time period, but right here is also a metal work, and those were manacles used to bind slaves. And so it was particularly relevant that the exhibition was in Baltimore because it had never staged an exhibition about slavery or institutional racism, although 8 out of 10 residents there are African American. This is Kara Walker, another installation. You can see there's projection. So these sort of light elements are the projection, and she's got cut paper and adhesive, and so these silhouettes are actually physically adhered to the wall. The work presents a story that combines fact and fiction. Walker explains that it is intended to show, quote, a slave revolt in the antebellum South, where the house slaves got after their master with their instruments, their utensils of everyday life, unquote. So obviously they did not have weapons of any kind. So they took the only things they were allowed to touch in this scene that she's created and use them as, you know, defensive or weapons. And then you have to go on that YouTube video to see this, but this is something called Dismaland, and it was by Banksy. So in it, he describes it as a, quote, family theme park unsuitable for small children. The name is a play on Disneyland, but Banksy insisted the show was not a swipe at Mickey and Company. He said, quote, "I banned any imagery of Mickey Mouse from the site," unquote. "It's a showcase for the best artists I could imagine, apart from the two who turned me down." So he kind of went to friends of his and artists he knew, and said, "Would you do a work for this exhibition?" So works by 58 handpicked artists, including Damien Hirst and Jenny Holzer, have been installed across the 2.5-acre site. And it's no longer extant, I believe, but you can watch that video about it. And it's pretty amusing. He's kind of it's kind of a play on a lot of different things. Look for his sort of commentary on immigration, and also see what happens to Cinderella as just two examples. And finally, this is called Red Sand Project. And the individual, as you can see, is spreading sand in sidewalk cracks in their neighborhood, New York. And so if you send away for one of these packets, this is what you receive. It's a participatory artwork that uses sidewalk interventions, earthwork installations, and convenings to create opportunities for people to question, to connect, and to take action against vulnerabilities that can lead to human trafficking and exploitation. Since its inception, installations and events have taken place in all 50 United States and in more than 70 countries around the world. So the idea is this red sand calls attention to, as it says, vulnerabilities that can lead to human traffic and exploitation. So obviously, the red sand calls, the passerby's attention, invokes their curiosity, etc. And that concludes this lecture.